For more than a decade, they've baffled scientists and UFO watchers. Gigantic circles appearing mysteriously overnight in England's cornfields.
Did you know a crop circle phenomenon was inspired by this mystery in Far North Queensland? This is where, in 1966, a young farmer saw something he couldn't explain. Right before he discovered a circle of flattened reeds in this lagoon. It was called a saucer nest back then. Now we call them crop circles. These days, if you Google, are crop circles real? The answer will be no. As in, no, not made by aliens. But what this man saw is still unexplained.
In 1966, my father's mate heard this tremendous hissing sound. The hissing got louder and he turned around and looked up, and what he saw was something that I don't think he ever forgot. It was a UFO rising out of the lagoon over here, tilting, hesitating. It just went above the tree line and then it took off.
All right, got a beautiful farm. Let's see how hard it is to make a crop circle.
For more than a decade, they've baffled scientists and UFO watchers. Gigantic circles appearing mysteriously overnight in England's cornfields.
The crop circle craze was once big news. The world was captivated until two Englishmen, Doug Bower and David Chorley, admitted they were behind at least some of them. The story was Doug and Dave would find a field, get some rope tied around a plank, and start stomping patterns into the ground, just like this. Far out, this takes a bit of work.
A pair of elderly artists say that the phenomenon has been their work all along, and they claim their inspiration came from Australia.
The pair were inspired by something that happened in the Queensland town of Tully in 1966.
But unlike the cornfields of England, Tully's so-called crop circles were made from reeds in a lagoon that were arranged in a clockwise pattern, and they were strong enough for a man to stand on.
But those Tully nests, they weren't a hoax. People here still swear they were inexplicable.
Probably not a usual day at the office for a lowly audio producer. But I can see this is a lot harder with sugarcane in Queensland rather than oats at night in the UK. Jerry, thanks for letting us use your cane.
Yeah, it's a bloody mess, but anyhow.
Do you think it looks like a crop circle?
No, I don't.
You might have heard about all this interest in UFOs, now UAP, in the US Congress the last few years. So what's Australia doing? Well, our government officially stopped investigating UFO reports in the 1990s when the Air Force closed their UFO files. Now, the government's official line is that there's nothing to see here on the topic of UFO or UAP. But if something warranted attention, they would investigate.
Senator, what I would say is I'm not aware of that. I am aware that there is reports due in the United States. If there is anything in that reporting that raises anything that would be a concern to us in our airspace, then we'll take that seriously.
Tasmanian Senator Peter Whish-Wilson has been using Senate estimates to try and ascertain what the Australian government is doing. Whish-Wilson faces quite a bit of ridicule for this line of questioning from his fellow senators, including this infamous question.
Is this a UFO question?
You could call them a UFO if you like, Senator Wong. They're now technically
just so I'm clear,
unidentified aerial phenomena. What do you think? Do you think it's funny?
It's been through these Senate estimates channels that a peculiar about-face occurred this year. The Department of Defence initially denied attending a UAP briefing at the Pentagon in America. Then, months later, it came out Australia did go, but Defence hasn't elaborated on why they initially denied going, which has stirred whispers of a covert investigation among hopeful ufologists in Australia. Meanwhile, in the States, there's a growing legitimacy to UAP. A video from a US Navy plane leaked online and showed something unidentified moving around in the sky. Even the New York Times did a story on it.
So then all of a sudden, you get participation by mainstream media, and it's like a ball rolling downhill. It just starts gaining momentum.
All this led to a US congressional hearing in 2023, where former intelligence officer David Grush testified to a secret, multi-decade UAP program. He reckons the US government has been reverse engineering spacecraft and has even recovered non-human biologics from crash sites.
I like to use the term non-human. I don't like to denote origin. Keeps the aperture open.
You know, people were sitting there like you could hear a pin drop.
The Pentagon denies a cover-up. UFO researchers in Australia, as well as citizens who've made UFO reports, and those who've kind of kept them a secret due to a fear of ridicule, have welcomed what's happening in the States for opening up the conversation. Back in the 80s, this guy got a case of appendicitis, and it led him to becoming one of the first civilians to lay eyes on the Australian government's UFO files. An interested UFO researcher, Bill Chalker, found it almost impossible to lay eyes on these files until he found himself bedridden with a bit of time on his hands.
What the hell? I'll start doing a ringing campaign to the Department of Defence and keep it up until I got a response.
Bill finally got access, and when he made his way in to look at them, they were dragged out in these large postal sacks. He got to it right away, organising them, until somebody rushed in.
The harried secretary turned up and, we've got a bit of a problem here, we just need to declassify them.
What he found in them, once they were declassified, he says a lot.
And that was a file that referred to a report that was written in 1954 by a Melbourne-based nuclear physicist who had a security clearance. He concluded that a residue of the data represented evidence of extraterrestrial craft, and that was in a secret report to Air Force intelligence in 1954.
Most UFO reports have mundane causes, but Bill was interested in the 3 to 4% that were unexplainable, like a UFO sighting from a military base in 1973.
So he had two separate witnesses to what appears to be the same event, one by the deputy commander of the base, and he observes what appeared to be an object hovering over the mountains and then seen to flick off at high speed. There was a separate report from an Australian fire captain working on the base. He observes a dish-shaped object with a sort of a satin ring shape around the bottom.
Unidentified objects flying around the sky above a super secret military base in the middle of the Cold War.
There was intense interest by both sides in the Cold War, the United States on the one hand, the Soviets on the other, to try to understand what the level of their technologies were with regard to space.
In the 90s, after the Cold War wrapped, those files were all sent off to the National Archives, and the RAF stopped investigating reports of UFOs. Not without its controversy from those who thought investigations into sightings should continue.
You can't make the logic leap to say that because I can't explain it, what I'm seeing is a threat to national security.
Government investigations into UFOs never really kicked off again in Australia, but people like Bill Chalker have kept searching for some explanation of inexplicable reports of things in the sky.
There's something worthwhile that's been recurring that would benefit from serious scientific engagement.
We made a podcast about UFOs, and this is what we found. Say the word UFO and you'll experience varying responses.
You could call them a UFO if you like, Senator Wong. They're now technically
so just so I'm clear,
unidentified aerial phenomena. What do you think? Do you think it's funny?
For some, it's interchangeable with little green aliens. For others, it's literally an unidentified flying object, a potential airspace threat worthy of serious scientific investigation. There's a giggle factor to the UFO topic.
Qualifies as a UFO, an unidentified flying object, mainly because it doesn't fly. Still, at least it's an object.
But also complex emotions of ridicule and judgment, and a real fear to talk about it publicly. UFO researchers have told me even taking it seriously can put your scientific career in the toilet.
You're better off saying that you're interested in witchcraft than flying saucers. It doesn't bode well for your ongoing scientific career path.
Others say this whole thing has gotten so big it's problematic for society, eroding trust in democratic institutions.
In the US, so this has worked its way away from the margins and into the core of the political system. Sometimes you can get surveys that show 60% odd for governments are not telling the truth about UFOs.
We started looking into this because of a UFO mystery in our own backyard. And when we approached people with openness and empathy, genuine interest in what they had to say, they started opening up.
For some reason, we were going to get inundated with UFOs.
Telling a story like this is really fraught. It's a topic that fires up heated debate and often just sees everyone hunker down in their own corners, which feels like a very familiar theme right now. But that doesn't move the conversation forward or help us understand people's perspective. In trying to balance empathy with skepticism while making this pod, I've realised that if we want to have open conversations about big issues, about anything, UFOs, politics, religion, we have to understand what someone else's truth is before we can understand where they're coming from.
Keep your mind open, but don't let your marbles fall out. I think a lot of people could benefit from that, including myself.
Season 4 of the ABC's Expanse podcast, Uncropped, is here. Stream it on the ABC Listen app.